In a twist that no one saw coming, one of Hollywood's most admired power couples is now caught in the eye of a legal firestorm that threatens to shake their empire. From the inside out, Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds, the golden duo known for their red carpet charm, flawless brand deals, and carefully managed public image, are now facing explosive allegations stemming from a leaked deposition that has the entertainment industry holding its breath. What started as a private legal skirmish between Blake and actor-director Justin Baldoni has morphed into a full-scale PR catastrophe, and at the center of it all lies a bombshell claim that could change everything: a $90 million motive to destroy Baldoni's career from the inside. According to insiders, the deposition includes moments where Blake is forced to confront emails, meetings, and statements that contradict her public narrative and suggest a much deeper involvement in industry conversations aimed at isolating Baldoni professionally. And while Blake's legal team denies any wrongdoing and Ryan has remained silent, the evidence is mounting, and it's painting a picture far darker than anyone imagined. Whispered meetings with executives, text messages warning studios to back off, anonymous PR tips that seem to coordinated to be random. It's all coming to light. And for two of the most powerful figures in modern Hollywood, this could be the beginning of a downfall that not even their fame can silence. This is not just a case, this is a calculated unraveling of image, money, power, and strategy. And what you're about to hear may change the way you see Blake and Ryan forever. Because the deeper you go into this story, the more you realize it was never about just one conversation. It was about control, image, and a $90 million secret. All started behind the tightly closed doors of a conference room, where the atmosphere was thick with tension and the stakes were impossibly high. Blake Lively, seated with her legal team beside her, kept her composure, but barely. The deposition was underway, and the questions were cutting sharper than anyone expected, not just about her actions, but about her intentions, her knowledge, her motives, and above all, the unraveling connection to a supposed $90 million incentive that has now become the core of the firestorm surrounding her and Ryan Reynolds, and their now increasingly public battle with actor, director, and producer Justin Baldoni. What was once seen as a private dispute has now transformed into a full-scale reputational war. And now the leaks from Blake's deposition are threatening to explode everything wide open. Insiders close to the situation have revealed stunning new details about what was said, what was denied, and what was nervously danced around. The transcript includes moments where Blake was confronted with documentation, phone records, and emails suggesting her team had conversations that directly contradicted her sworn statements, and even more explosive was the line of questioning about Ryan Reynolds and his alleged role in strategizing certain moves aimed at undermining Baldoni's film development efforts, which sources now claim threatened a multi-decade deal worth up to $90 million in production revenue. According to two people familiar with the confidential deposition materials, Blake initially deflected, but eventually admitted under pressure that she had discussed Baldoni's Wayfarer project with executives at least two studios, both of which reportedly pulled back from previous interest. Shortly after those conversations took place, this raises major questions about whether Blake acted with the intent to disrupt those deals, and if so, whether Ryan was aware or involved in any capacity. The possibility of a coordinated effort is now being examined not only by Baldoni's legal team but also by several third-party observers, who are reportedly compiling timelines and financial documents to determine the scope of what may have been lost, and whether any of those losses can be legally attributed to interference. And while Blake's legal team argues that these were standard industry conversations and nothing more, the leaks from the deposition paint a very different picture. There's reportedly a moment when Blake is shown an internal studio email in which a development executive wrote that Blake personally warned them off the Wayfarer project, calling it controversial and a reputational risk, and yet just days earlier, under oath, she denied ever discouraging anyone from working with Baldoni. When presented with the email, she went silent for a full 20 seconds, and according to sources in the room, the silence spoke louder than any denial could. Blake eventually responded by saying she didn't recall the email and that perhaps the executive misinterpreted her comments. But the damage was already done. The seed of doubt had been planted, and it's one that's growing fast, especially as public interest in the case surges and more insiders begin to speak out. One such insider, a former assistant now turned whistleblower, has come forward claiming that the real motive behind the campaign against Baldoni wasn't personal at all but entirely financial. According to this source, the $90 million deal was set to involve a major streaming platform looking to lock in a slate of prestige dramas led by socially conscious filmmakers, and Wayfarer was reportedly at the top of that list. But the project's inclusion hinged on Baldoni's public reputation remaining intact. and free of major controversies, and once Blake and Ryan allegedly began expressing concerns about his work ethic and values to key industry stakeholders, the platform grew nervous and eventually froze negotiations, entirely costing Wayfair its largest single opportunity to date. The insider also alleges that Blake used her personal network to ensure certain journalists were fed a curated narrative about Baldoni's leadership, and that this was done under the guise of protecting future projects from potential backlash. If they associated with him, it's a serious claim, one that, if proven true, could have major consequences not only for Blake's reputation, but also potentially for Ryan's as well, since many of the communications included in the leak involve shared contacts and joint conversations. The public has already begun reacting with outrage as more details from the deposition make their way into the media, prompting many to question how much of the campaign against Baldoni was rooted in truth, and how much was an orchestrated effort to preserve a lucrative deal that now appears to be dead. The $90 million figure is staggering, and it puts into perspective just how high the stakes may have been for everyone involved. But even more concerning are the ethical implications of what's being suggested. The idea that a powerful couple in Hollywood could leverage their influence to potentially sink a rival's career and projects for personal gain, or to secure a competitive advantage, is sparking outrage across the industry, and it's why many are now calling for a deeper investigation into what exactly happened behind the scenes, what conversations were had, and who ultimately benefited or stood to benefit from Baldoni's downfall. And perhaps most damning of all is the question no one can yet answer: did Blake lie under oath? Did she misrepresent her involvement? And did she attempt to downplay the extent to which she and Ryan may have influenced industry opinion around Baldoni's work and intentions? Because if that's the case, this is no longer just a PR disaster, it could become a legal one too. And the deposition leaks might only be the beginning of what's yet to come. As the legal battle between Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni continues to unravel behind the courtroom doors, the public narrative is beginning to shift dramatically, and now with deposition leaks making their way into the hands of reporters and digital commentators alike, the scope of what's allegedly been uncovered is blowing the roof off what many initially believed was just a private falling out between celebrities. According to those familiar with the details, Blake's statements under oath have now been contradicted by at least 3 different witnesses, including one anonymous executive who claims they were directly warned by Blake to steer clear of Baldoni's Wayfair productions, and that she used specific language suggesting the project would be plagued by reputational problems. And behind the scenes drama, this directly clashes with Blake's sworn testimony, where she insisted she had only positive things to say about Baldoni professionally and had no intent to interfere with his work. And yet, when the deposition transcripts were reviewed by an independent media ethics advisor, the conclusion was that Blake's answers were evasive, potentially misleading, and carefully worded in ways that avoided absolute statements but still implied deniability, a strategy that legal experts say is often used to skirt perjury without offering full transparency. This tactic may have worked in the short term, but now that email records and texts are surfacing, it's clear that the deposition was just the first crack in a much larger dam, and it may not hold for long, especially if the insider testimony holds up. The former assistant, who has become a central figure in this unfolding drama, claims that a months-long campaign was orchestrated from Blake and Ryan's home office, with both of them fully aware of the strategy to protect an impending business deal, which reportedly included executive producing roles, licensing fees, and back-end points worth up to $90 million across multiple titles. What makes this allegation even more alarming is that it suggests not just passive participation, but active maneuvering by 2 of Hollywood's most influential figures. The assistant says Blake maintained spreadsheets listing executives to contact publicists to brief, and journalists considered sympathetic to their concerns, and that Ryan was involved in at least one video call with a PR strategist in which Baldoni's perceived weaknesses as a producer were laid out in a deck presentation. Insiders familiar with the call say that while Ryan never explicitly endorsed any defamatory tactics, he remained on the call throughout and raised no objection to the direction of the conversation. The optics of that are now becoming a problem, especially as Ryan's name continues to be mentioned in tandem with Blake's in the leaked deposition notes. But perhaps the most shocking moment came when Blake was asked about a particular meeting at the Soho House in West Hollywood, where she allegedly spoke to a high-ranking executive from a major streaming platform and expressed direct concerns about Justin's personal beliefs, leadership style, and past employment decisions. When confronted with a photo taken of her at the venue that same day in the same outfit. Blake initially said she couldn't remember the meeting taking place at all. The room reportedly fell into stunned silence. The questioning attorney paused and then asked her again, this time pointing to a dated text message between Blake and her agent referencing the meeting by name and location. At that point, Blake revised her answer and acknowledged the meeting did occur, but said she did not remember the details and denied making any statements that could be interpreted as sabotage. Whether the court believes her will be a critical turning point in this case, especially given that the streaming platform in question was rumored to have pulled out of negotiations with Baldoni's company just 5 days after that meeting. Legal commentators following the case say this timeline is more than just coincidental, it's circumstantial evidence that will be hard to ignore, especially if other testimony or documentation further supports the claim that Blake and Ryan used their influence to sway executive decisions. And now that the transcripts from the deposition are out, albeit unofficially, the media has picked up the scent with think pieces, editorials, and podcasts dissecting every word Blake said or didn't say, trying to determine whether her behavior was self-preservation or something more strategic. Some legal analysts suggest that if the $90 million deal can be proven to have been a motivating factor, and if Blake's deposition statements are proven false, this could open the door to civil liability for interference with business relations or even fraud, if damages can be proven to have resulted directly from those conversations. And although Blake's legal team continues to deny any wrongdoing and insists that the entire narrative is being distorted by a disgruntled former employee, the increasing number of sources stepping forward suggests that this story is far from a fabrication and more likely a calculated effort to control a damaging narrative before it spirals out of their control. What was once an unthinkable idea, Blake and Ryan being at the center of a campaign to destroy a fellow actor-director, is now becoming not only possible but increasingly plausible, and in the court of public opinion, that alone is enough to cause irreversible damage to their brand and public image. And it doesn't help that social media has turned into a battlefield with hashtags like Justice for Baldwin and Cancel Thesmere trending across platforms, as more influencers, commentators, and even fellow celebrities weigh in on the implications of what's being revealed. And while Blake has remained silent in the public arena, choosing not to post or comment since the deposition leaks began, Ryan has been spotted at multiple events, but is noticeably refusing to take questions from the press. His silence is being interpreted in different ways by different groups. Some say it's wise, others call it suspicious, but one thing is clear: this silence will not hold forever, especially as the court proceedings continue, and the pressure mounts for both Blake and Ryan to respond directly to the growing allegations against them. It's a high-stakes game now, not just for them but for everyone in their inner circle, especially those who may be called to testify as the case moves into its next phase. The fallout from these deposition leaks has just begun, and the consequences may reach farther than anyone predicted, especially if the $90 million motive can be traced back to deliberate actions taken in boardrooms, back channels, and whispered phone calls. The spotlight is brighter than ever, and for Blake and Ryan, their worst nightmare may still be ahead of them. The ripple effects from Blake Lively's deposition continue to escalate as more leaked details circulate and insiders step forward with corroborating accounts. It's becoming increasingly evident that what began as a contained legal proceeding is rapidly morphing into a full-scale industry scandal with the potential to reshape not only the careers of those involved but the very way Hollywood handles internal disputes and reputational power plays. The tension behind the scenes is palpable, with media outlets scrambling to obtain authenticated deposition footage and legal analysts now dissecting the implications of every word spoken under oath. According to one legal source who reviewed a portion of the deposition transcript, Blake was repeatedly asked if she had any financial stake in the collapse of Justin Baldoni's Wayfair negotiations, and though she denied any direct benefit, the follow-up questions painted a clearer picture. Blake admitted under questioning that she and Ryan had previously been in discussions with two separate platforms about developing original content, and that both platforms had expressed concern about negative press involving associated producers. This alone wouldn't raise alarms except for the fact that one of those producers named in the platform's concerns was Justin Baldoni, and the timing of these discussions aligned suspiciously with the moment those negative press narratives began gaining traction online and in Hollywood circles. There are now whispers that a PR firm tied to Blake and Ryan's management team may have played a subtle but pivotal role in shaping those stories, not by fabricating details, but by curating the delivery of known industry grievances into a more damaging narrative. Multiple media professionals are now privately acknowledging that they received anonymous tips referencing Baldoni's temperament, project delays, and alleged behind-the-scenes disputes, and that these tips seemed oddly coordinated, landing in their inboxes within hours of each other with vague but suggestive language that pushed the story into a viral cycle. The insiders claim they didn't initially question the origin of the tips, assuming they came from legitimate sources within the industry, but in hindsight the timing and tone seem more like a PR maneuver than organic concern. And now that Blake's deposition suggests she was aware of industry pushback against Baldoni and had contact with at least one executive who later passed on working with him, the theory that she was connected to the smear campaign is gaining credibility. And while Blake's defenders insist that there's no proof she or Ryan ever authorized such tactics, critics are pointing to her own words in the deposition as indicators of deeper involvement. For instance, when asked if she knew whether her comments could have influenced executives to walk away from Baldoni's projects, Blake reportedly responded with, "I can't speak to what others interpret from casual industry conversations," which some legal commentators say is not a denial but a deflection, and in a courtroom setting that matters greatly, especially when determining intent and accountability. And then there's the elephant in the room, the $90 million deal, which continues to cast a long shadow over everything. If it can be proven that Blake or Ryan acted in any way to secure that deal by creating professional obstacles for Baldoni, the legal implications could be massive, not only for potential civil liability, but for the reputational damage that would follow them for years to come. More troubling still is the emerging timeline of events, which shows that just days before a studio announced it was pausing development on a Wayfair-linked project, Blake had dinner with one of the studio's board members at a private residence in Brentwood. When asked about the dinner in her deposition, Blake confirmed it happened, but denied that Baldoni was discussed. However, an anonymous source familiar with that dinner claims the opposite, saying that the topic of Baldoni was not only raised but discussed in detail, with Blake allegedly expressing concern over the optics of his brand and how it might affect upcoming projects. If this is true, it could be interpreted as another example of covert influence exerted behind closed doors. And the fact that multiple incidents of this nature keep surfacing paints a disturbing picture of how power and influence can be used to steer outcomes in the entertainment world, where reputation is everything. This would explain why Baldoni's team is reportedly preparing a supplemental filing to include these deposition contradictions and new witness statements in their broader legal strategy. Their goal, sources say, is to prove a pattern of behavior and intent, and to show that Blake Lively was not a passive observer to a crumbling business relationship, but an active participant in causing the damage. And as for Ryan Reynolds, while his name has not appeared in court filings as directly as Blake's, his connection to the entire timeline cannot be ignored. The leaked notes from Blake's deposition show that when asked about joint business decisions, she frequently used the phrase "we" or "our team" rather than naming Ryan specifically, but then contradicted herself when referencing a meeting that only he and his agent attended. This inconsistency is raising questions about how much Ryan truly knew and whether he was purposefully kept separate from certain discussions for legal insulation, or was in fact a quiet architect of the broader media strategy. Either possibility presents serious challenges for the couple's public image, which until now has been largely unmarred by scandal and widely admired for its perceived authenticity, humor, and philanthropic efforts. But now those same traits are being re-examined through a more critical lens as the public begins to wonder how much of their brand has been carefully curated, and whether it came at the expense of someone else's professional future. The backlash is already showing signs of intensifying, with one top marketing analyst suggesting that the couple's commercial partnerships could be at risk if the story continues to escalate. Several brand managers have reportedly requested internal reviews to determine whether to pause or reevaluate campaigns featuring either Blake or Ryan, and some insiders say this is only the beginning if the media continues to follow the trail from the deposition leaks to boardroom decisions to the mysterious disappearance of a $90 million opportunity. For Justin Baldoni, the couple may face more than just legal challenges. They could lose the public trust. And for celebrities who rely on that trust to maintain relevance and influence, that loss may be the most devastating consequence of all. What began as whispers is now a chorus, and the next move they make will be watched more closely than ever before. As the court calendar moves forward, and the media frenzy only continues to accelerate, the full weight of Blake Lively's leaked deposition and its ripple effects is becoming impossible to contain now. What was once a carefully managed image of A beloved Hollywood couple has turned into a spectacle of whispered strategy, contested timelines, and a growing list of former allies turning into reluctant witnesses. The former assistant, who spoke out, has now reportedly been contacted for a follow-up interview as part of the case's expanding discovery phase, with Baldoni's legal team preparing to call additional figures from both the talent management and executive development worlds who may have either witnessed or participated in conversations that undermined his projects. The aim, according to those close to the case, is simple: to establish a pattern of disruption that can be directly linked to Blake's actions, and more subtly to Ryan's involvement. It's a difficult but not impossible legal hill to climb, especially with deposition testimony that has already begun to cast doubt on Blake's earlier claims of detachment from the unfolding crisis. Her insistence that she played no role in influencing studio decisions is now weakened by the mounting volume of secondary evidence, and the persistent question hovering over every aspect of the inquiry remains: how much of this was about personal animus, and how much was about money? Because if the $90 million figure tied to production and licensing deals is accurate, and if Blake and Ryan stood to directly or indirectly benefit from the sidelining of Baldoni, then the ethical stakes rise considerably. The court of law may need to parse legal definitions and contractual implications, but the court of public opinion has already begun to draw its own conclusions, and that reaction is starting to bleed into industry dynamics. Several insiders have noted that certain projects once associated with Blake's brand are now quietly being reevaluated, including at least one limited series that was set to move into production this fall but has since been put on hold due to what one executive described as optics concerns. The unraveling narrative is causing a reputational tremor that's being felt far beyond the courtroom, and for Ryan Reynolds, the implications are growing. Despite his careful silence and calculated absence from public comment, the leaked emails reportedly include at least 2 instances where he was CC'd on correspondence discussing reputational risks around Baldoni's company, and while being copied on an email does not prove participation, legal experts say it does raise the stakes of what Ryan knew and when he knew it. And in Hollywood, timing is everything, especially when tied to a narrative that now includes claims of intentional professional sabotage, whether through words, omissions, or executive whispers. The timeline is rapidly becoming a liability for both Blake and Ryan, and their team now finds itself playing defense against a story that is unfolding faster than they can control. The deposition leak has acted as a floodgate, and what's pouring out isn't just damaging details, it's a recalibration of how influence works in Hollywood and who gets to steer the narrative, and for how long. Now journalists are connecting the dots between Blake's shifting language in the deposition and her known affiliations with certain influential PR advisors, including one who has reportedly gone dark since the leaks began, and others are beginning to raise questions about why none of the major trade outlets initially reported on the growing tensions between Blake and Baldoni, even as industry murmurs had been circulating for months. Some believe it's because Blake and Ryan's influence was strong enough to keep the story contained until the courtroom brought it into the light, but now that it's out, it's becoming a snowball hurtling downhill, and nothing is off limits. Not the leaked transcripts, not the dinner meetings, not even the pattern of studio deals that seemingly fell apart in precise lockstep with Blake's alleged behind-the-scenes conversations. And what's even more shocking is that some allies who once defended Blake's character are now going quiet or walking back their support, suggesting that the situation is more serious than originally thought. One former collaborator, who had previously praised Blake's professionalism, recently issued a carefully worded statement saying that reputations are earned, not protected. And in a town where relationships are everything, those words land like thunder, not just for Blake, but for anyone seen as standing too close to her now. The deposition is doing more than just exposing contradictions, it's revealing the machinery behind how certain narratives are built, who gets elevated and who gets sidelined, and what happens when that machinery begins to fail. For Baldoni, this may be an unexpected turning point. After months of silence and perceived losses, the momentum is beginning to shift. Public opinion is starting to view him not as a disruptive figure, but as someone who was strategically targeted, and for every revelation from the deposition comes another moment of validation for his version of events, especially the suggestion that the backlash against him was not organic, but orchestrated. The coming weeks will be pivotal as more witnesses are scheduled to appear, and Baldoni's legal team plans to introduce communications between industry insiders that may further confirm their theory of deliberate sabotage. The stakes are enormous, not just financially but reputationally for everyone involved, because if even part of this strategy can be traced back to a desire to preserve a $90 million deal, and that deal's success was contingent upon Baldoni's absence. From a growing development pipeline, then the moral gravity of the situation shifts entirely, and that shift may be too much for Blake and Ryan's brand to withstand, despite their silence, despite their legal defense, despite their legacy of charm and calculated public goodwill. The shadow cast by this deposition leak is long, and it shows no signs of shrinking anytime soon. What began as a quiet legal dispute has erupted into one of the most closely watched and controversial Hollywood scandals in recent memory, with deposition leaks pulling back the curtain on power, influence, and a possible $90 million motive to strategically dismantle a rival's career. Blake Lively, once seen as untouchable, now faces growing questions about her role in conversations that may have directly undermined Justin Baldoni's projects and reputation. The silence from Ryan Reynolds only intensifies the scrutiny, as legal teams, media outlets, and the public search for answers in the gaps left by carefully worded statements and missing details. The evidence revealed so far doesn't just suggest casual miscommunication or unfortunate timing. It points to a pattern of influence being leveraged in back-channel meetings, orchestrated calls, and timed industry whispers, all aligning at the very moment Baldoni's career was gaining momentum and Wayfarer stood to secure life-changing deals. And now, as more witnesses are contacted, more records are reviewed, and more inconsistencies surface, the narrative is no longer under control, even for those who once held all the cards, because the truth, no matter how carefully hidden, has a way of leaking through cracks. And those cracks are now gaping wounds in the glossy facade of Hollywood royalty. This isn't just about a deposition or a lawsuit. This is about power unchecked, strategy exposed, and reputations at risk. And for Blake and Ryan, the road ahead looks uncertain. What was once their strongest asset, public trust, may now be slipping beyond their grasp, and the question remains not whether they'll respond, but how and when, and if that response will be enough to repair the damage that's already been done. Because sometimes in Hollywood, the real drama doesn't play out on screen. It unfolds behind closed doors and deposition transcripts.